The problem with nuclear energy is not this series of physical threats. Those are real but manageable, and in comparison with overheating the planet, risks we should be willing to take. The problem is that it's ridiculously expensive right now. I've written a lot of, yes, in my backyard. The biggest threat to the countryside in America, the UK, and everywhere else is the rapid rise in temperature. That's going to transform every wild, natural place on the planet in almost unimaginable ways. The only way to slow that down is to take some small percentage of that land and use it to produce energy. All the campaigning we did for 3 decades was on a world where fossil fuel was cheap and renewable energy was expensive. Now we live in a world where fossil energy is relatively expensive and renewable energy is relatively cheap. In fact, really cheap and getting cheaper all the time. So now the goal of activism has to be to figure out how to speed that transition.
Welcome to Saving the World from Bad Ideas. I'm Mark Lynas, and I've had a few bad ideas in my time. I used to go out in the nighttime to destroy GMO crops, and I also opposed nuclear power. But then when I looked at the science, I found I got it wrong. Oops! I've learned the hard way that none of us are right all the time. So now I'm here to challenge the assumptions that we all too often take for granted, because the future depends on us getting it right. Hello, so I'm here with Bill McKibben, who's an activist, writer and scholar currently at Middlebury College, and has been called America's leading environmentalist, also a good friend of mine. So welcome, Bill, to the Saving the World from Bad Ideas podcast.
It's very, very good to be with you, as always.
Absolutely. And I almost forgot to... there's a few more things I should say about you, because you've had such a distinguished career as an environmentalist, and you've done so much in climate activism. You co-founded 350.org, more recently Third Act. Am I old enough to join that yet? That's for older folks, right?
You got to be 60, but we don't really check IDs, so you can wander by if you want.
I'll give it 10 years.
Everybody's eventually. That's the
yeah. Well, inshallah. And your new book's called Here Comes the Sun, A Last Chance for the Climate and a Fresh Chance for Civilization. That's out now. You actually mentioned in the book, Here Comes the Sun is the most popular track by the Beatles. And I checked that on Spotify about an hour ago. And you're absolutely right, 1.6 billion versus 8 billion each for Let It Be and Come Together. And I guess I'm pretty sure George Harrison would have approved, but did you have to get permission to use the phrase?
Titles are the one thing you can't copyright. So I just went ahead and used it. But I hope he would have approved. And I hope he's, it's actually kind of fun that having spent his career hanging around with arguably the 2 greatest songwriters of the 20th century, he obviously had picked up a thing or two, because Here Comes the Sun is almost a perfect pop song. And its gentle, optimistic tenor, I think, is why people still treasure it to this day.
Yeah, I think it might be my favorite. I mean, it's difficult. There's so many, and my favorite changes every day in terms of Beatles songs, but it is definitely up there. And anyway, I mean, the thesis of the book is that solar is powering clean energy transformation, which is coming perhaps just in time to save us from dramatic levels of climate change. I mean, what's your... it's a fairly optimistic book, certainly given your oeuvre of fairly pessimistic books. So how are you feeling?
You've been working on this almost as long as I have. I mean, not quite, because you're a young man, but, I wrote the first book about climate change back in the 1980s. And really, this is the first thing that's happened in that time frame that offers any kind of scalable solution to the gravest problem that human beings have ever come across. Now, is it going to stop global warming? No, too late for that. It's already causing us enormous problems. Those problems will grow. At this point, we're talking about, can we stop climate change before it cuts civilizations off at the knees? Which I think is an open question, but I think that this is the first thing that's given us even a possibility, a glimmer of that. And you're right, there's a kind of cinematic quality to it. It was June of 2023 that we saw the beginning of the most recent spike in temperatures. That was the month climatologists were saying, we're recording the warmest temperatures in the last 125,000 years. And every month since then has been, the hottest August, the second hottest April, whatever. June 2023 was also the month when human beings began installing more than a gigawatt of solar panels a day, a gigawatt being the rough equivalent of, say, a coal-fired power plant. So these two lines are crossed, we'll see. But it's happening at a fast enough rate that one could imagine speeding it up by another pitch and really getting somewhere.
Right. I mean, producer Rob will be gesticulating at me soon, saying, "You haven't done the bad idea." So we have to have a bad idea that you're tackling in this podcast. And I guess, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? The bad idea is that solar can't power the world. I mean, how many times have we heard that over the decades and years? I mean, the sun's not shining at night, batteries are too expensive, industrial, blah 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 blah. So you've heard it all 1,000 times. Like, do you have a quick fire response to that?
That the engineers have done us an enormous favor. With the help of activists who pushed hard over the years for the funding that would allow this to happen, the engineers have now produced a technology cheaper than burning coal and gas and oil. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to make energy is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That's true for the last maybe 5 years. And it represents an epochal moment in human civilization. If we wanted to, we could, in fairly rapid order, leave combustion behind. And on the other side of combustion lies a very different world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's extraordinary how rapidly this is now taking place, isn't it? And the transformations far outpace all of the predictions from the likes of the International Energy Agency, who always predict it's going to level off. And what we're on is almost like a proper, like, real transformative S-curve, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's because there's a deep technological learning curve that goes with this technology. Not all technologies get on that curve, Fossil fuel was pretty cheap at the start, and it's pretty cheap now, but it's not getting cheaper. If anything, it's getting more expensive because you got to go deeper in the coal mine to get the coal. But when we talk about solar power and wind power, we're not talking really about a commodity. The commodity, sun and wind, is free. All we're talking about really is the application of human brain power to technologies, and that's has proved to be a remarkable thing. The first solar cell was built in 1954 in New Jersey, Bell Labs in New Jersey, funded by tens of millions of Americans dropping dimes in payphones, And at Bell Labs, they built this solar cell in 1954, and it was so expensive, the only thing you could use it on was satellites. But the iteration, generation after generation, has kept making it cheaper and more efficient, and now it's past this line. And that's a great moment. We have the possibility. Now we have to actually make it pay off by deploying it at the pace that we know is possible, because we can look at a few places around the world and see what that looks like. One of them, obviously, is China, where most of this has been happening, and where the Chinese carbon emissions are now falling. Maybe the most remarkable example for the Western world is California, fourth largest economy in the world. California is using 40% less natural gas to generate electricity than they did 2 years ago, because we finally have reached some tipping point in terms of the number of solar panels and, crucially, the number of batteries on that grid. So these are big numbers. 40% drop in fossil fuel use for generating electricity. That's the kind of number that starts knocking some tenths of a degree Celsius off how hot the planet eventually gets.
I mean, there's always been this kind of conversation about whether solar plus batteries can make the 100%, right? Like, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, 95% will be pretty good, and we should go there, and the other 5% will work out one way or another. But, like, do you get into this debate?
I think in terms of our current time frame and the time frame of dealing with climate change, it's not important. What's important is the speed with which we're deploying all this stuff. And, the last 5% of whatever is obviously going to be hard, and someone has to figure out what we're going to do with transcontinental air travel and, on and on. But that's not given where we are, it's like, I don't know what a good analogy is. It's like bailing out a boat. It's hard to get that last bit of water there off the bottom of the boat because, your bucket's scraping up against the keel. But if you're sinking, it's a good idea not to worry about that and start getting overboard what you can,
Yeah. I mean, there's fair few nuclear enthusiasts listen to this podcast. You actually have a fairly generous take in the book. You don't want to shut down nuclear plants. You say it's a side dish which may be quite useful.
Yeah, I mean,
what have you got any? Can you
who
throw
knows?
them a bone?
Who knows? Yeah, who knows? 10, 15, 20 years from now, it may be ready to make some kind of substantial difference, but it's not there now. And we need to be moving now. What we have now is sun, wind, and batteries at an affordable price. The problem with nuclear energy is not this series of physical threats. Those are real, but manageable. And in comparison with overheating the planet, risks we should be willing to take. The problem is that it's ridiculously expensive right now. And so the money that we have, we should be using to deploy very affordable things. And for people who are deep nuclear enthusiasts, and I keep meeting people who are, I try to console them just with the thought that even solar energy really is just nuclear at a long distance. We're just taking advantage of this beautiful fusion reactor 93 million miles up in the sky. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, fusion hasn't been shown to work in terms of power generation here on Earth. There's been lots of attempts over many decades, right? And it always seems to be a little bit away. So, as you say, why not use the gigantic fusion reaction, which is working all the time up there, 8 light minutes away? The question, I guess, is how this clean energy transition is working globally in different places, and in particular in the US where you're based. I mean, it really feels like the US is getting left behind, right?
Yeah. Well, the US is choosing to be left behind. Again, this is where we developed the solar cell and the lithium battery. But we've now decided, truthfully, the proof of how fast this is happening is the depth of the reaction in the fossil fuel industry in the US. If I know that California is using 40% less natural gas to generate electricity, you can be certain that the people in Houston are well aware of that statistic too. That's why they poured unprecedented amounts of money into last year's election campaign, and they're reaping the benefits as they stand now. Trump administration doing everything it can to outlaw renewable energy in this country. Do I think they'll succeed in America? I think they'll succeed in slowing it down, but it's going to be harder than they think. The place where it's growing fastest in America is Texas, red state, conservative Texas, which nonetheless has a deep demand for more energy and has long since figured out that the cheapest and most grid reliable way to get it is some combination of solar, wind, and batteries. The Texas legislature this year declined to enact the kind of things that the federal government's enacting because they had people from across Texas showing up at hearings saying, this is how we fund our schools. Do not shut down our solar farms, But even if the U.S. manages to shut down an awful lot of this, and one can imagine a scenario where 20 years from now, the U.S. is a kind of museum of internal combustion that the rest of the world visits to see what the world used to look like, That's not going to stop the rest of the world, I don't think. This is clearly the way that China has decided they will emerge as a preeminent global power. And their trading networks at this point are at least as deep across the developing world as America's. And you can now follow those networks and just watch the spread of solar panels and the spread of EVs. I mean, if you want a proxy map for power in this world, look at where BYD is selling cars. And you begin to get a sense of, what the future looks like.
There's a lot of concerns about human rights in China. This is a very authoritarian power, which certainly threatens democracy and threatens freedom of speech and human rights around the world. Yep. How do you square sort of celebrating China's success as like the clean energy superpower with some of these other political questions?
I'm not certain you can completely square that success. I think it may be one of these places where we just have to say they're doing some things very wrong and they're doing some things very right. I'm afraid at this point, those of us in the U.S. are in not a very good position to be nattering on about human rights. We're busy sending people off to El Salvador to jail, But I take the point. I'd much rather have the U.S. taking the lead here. That's why we worked incredibly hard to get this IRA passed under President Biden, which really was allowing America to start catching up in this game. But that's now gone, thanks to Donald Trump. And so in the real world in which we live, China's the big player. China's putting up, as of May, China was putting up 3 gigawatts of solar panels a day, 3 coal-fired power plants worth of solar panels every day. I mean, the scale of what they're doing is astonishing. And the thing that encourages me is that is leaking out across their borders to the places that have access to their trade routes. Pakistan being the most remarkable example. Pakistanis put up the equivalent of half their national electric grid last year, just nailing solar panels to the roofs of houses and factories and mini malls and whatever else. I've watched the videos. I mean, it's not like these were experts doing this. People were going on TikTok and finding videos with Hindustani music in the background, telling them how to attach solar panels. That's how that happened. Pakistani farmers last year used 35% less diesel than they had the year before to run their irrigation wells that are, the sine qua non for agriculture in Asia. Diesel was their biggest input. They were the earliest adopters for these solar panels. In most cases, too poor to build the steel supports for them. They just laying the panels on the ground and pointing them at the sun. So the speed with which this is happening across the places that where China has deep mercantile interests is pretty remarkable. Africa being the next part of that story.
Yeah, are you seeing this happening in Africa as well? Because obviously Africa's historically been very energy poor. I mean, it's desperate for increased electricity, and solar is obviously the cheapest way to go. Is the price, the very low price of Chinese solar panels presumably is actually helpful there, because there's no domestic solar industry in any of these.
Oh, absolutely, and that's what's happening. I mean, both Pakistan and most of Africa have the combination of either high-priced or unavailable electricity, and when it is available, it's really unreliable. And so solar panels, especially solar plus batteries, which is what everyone in Pakistan's now doing, is the easy answer for that dilemma.
Yeah. Are you seeing this transformation also with wind? Because, I mean, there's a lot about solar, it's here comes the sun, but wind is it becoming a kind of junior partner in the renewables transformation?
Yeah, I'm not even so sure junior. I mean, there's lots of parts of the world where it's well ahead of solar, and it tends to, we live on a political and economic planet, but also a physical one. So wind does better at northern latitudes, which is good because that's where the solar resource is least reliable, at least year round. So wind is an equally remarkable story. It's just part of the same solar energy package. The wind blows because the sun heats the earth more in some places than others, producing the breeze that turns those majestic turbines.
And do you find yourself battling NIMBYs in the US and elsewhere? I mean, there's been some big campaigns against solar farms here in the UK. Is it kind of a strange position for you to be in as an environmentalist to say, like, yes, go ahead, build this massive industrial installation out there? I've written a lot about
yes in my backyard. We need to do it. The biggest threat to the countryside in America, the UK, and everywhere else is the rapid rise in temperature. That's going to transform every wild, natural place on the planet in almost unimaginable ways. The only way to slow that down is to take some small percentage of that land and use it to produce energy. In the US, the argument's really almost too easy, because in the US, our biggest crop is corn, and we use about half the land that we use to grow corn is just growing gasoline. That corn's being turned into ethanol. But it's unbelievably inefficient, Mark. You can take a acre of good Illinois corn land and grow ethanol on it, grow corn and convert it to ethanol. And that'll produce enough ethanol to take a Ford F-150 pickup, our most popular vehicle, take that about 25,000 miles. Solar panels on that same acre in the course of a year will take the Ford F-150 EV version, not 25,000 miles, but about 750,000 miles. It's orders of magnitude more efficient. And that means that we're not going to have to sacrifice the entire landscape or anything like it, but we are going to have to readjust our aesthetic sense some. I've grown to love the look of windmills on the horizon. I think they're the breeze made visible, and I think they're also just a reminder that we're for once being a little bit responsible and not transposing the cost of our lifestyles off to someone else in some distant place.
Yeah, we've done land use quite a lot on this show. We had Mike Grunwald, who's a writer for Washington Post, and his new book. I can't remember the title. Sorry, but actually, the big land use issue is meat, livestock, and everything else. Pretty much as a rounding error, even including very large scale, use of solar and wind. So, I mean, I think. What's really interesting also is it called agrivoltaics? So you can actually combine solar and some agricultural production?
So I think this is the huge future, and I love writing about it. If you think about it for a minute, on an overheated planet, shade is a valuable commodity. And it turns out that it's a valuable commodity for farmers in all kinds of ways. Just to give the most vivid example, I just was reading about a series of new trials in France where vineyards were finding 60% increase in grape yields when they were growing them in fields with solar panels. I mean, I'm a beer guy myself, so, what do I really care? But it's a powerful reminder. In Vermont, where I live, many of the solar farms have been interplanted with pollinator-friendly wildflowers, and they've attracted astonishing numbers of pollinators, such that the farmers on the borders of these solar farms are reporting huge increases, 30, 40% in fruit set in their orchards. There's all of a sudden insects doing all the work of pollination. That's a pretty hard to come by commodity in a over-pesticided world,
Yeah, I mean, I've visited Midwestern corn crops a couple of times, and I think there's zero biodiversity in those farming systems. That's
close to a biological desert as you can find. Yeah.
Right. So having some solar panels and wildflowers and, bushes or whatever, even sheep would be a big improvement.
Sheep and cows both work. The word on the street is don't graze goats. They like to eat the cables and they enjoy trying to jump up on the panels. So sheep is if you want some wool, then that works.
There's a couple of other kind of green sacred cows that you actually take on in the book. You're quite skeptical about degrowth. I mean, and that's a position that you've been supportive of in the past, in your past work. So tell us, have you shifted on this, or is this, yeah?
I wrote a book years ago called Deep Economy that argued that growth did a lot less for us than we think it does, especially around the kind of basic question of, does it make us happier or not? Which strikes me as a useful metric. And so that's how I live my life and so on. But despite my best efforts at organizing, have never found much progress in getting human beings to re-examine their desires and act on them. And B, I think we had what would you say, a natural experiment about all this during COVID. The first 3 or 4 months of COVID, we changed lifestyles in ways that no environmentalist would ever have imagined telling people to do. Nobody got on an airplane, nobody drove anywhere, no one did anything, And emissions went down a little bit, about 10%, I think, around the globe. But that's not very much. And I think what it was kind of proof that the problem really lies in the kind of guts of the machinery. We've got to reach inside the big machine that we call civilization and rip out the coal and oil and gas and stick in some wind and sun and batteries. And we've got to do it while the machine is running. So that's hard, but that's where we are.
It's really interesting how the oil companies seem to be going backwards now as well. They seem to get, BP, Shell, all Exxon, they've all been getting out of renewables. And I guess this shows that oil is still insanely profitable, even as it, looks like it's going to have to go into complete structural decline.
Yeah, it's you can make some money at the moment. The real problem for the oil companies is what they've figured out is that you can't make that kind of money off renewables. It's not that there won't be renewable millionaires and billionaires and things. There already are. But you can't make Exxon scale money because the sun and the wind deliver the energy for free. Once you've built the necessary panels or turbines or things, then there's no longer that recurring payment that's made the oil industry rich for 100 years, which is great news for all the rest of us, but terrible news if you own an oil well or a coal mine or something, which is why they've rallied to do what they can to slow down this transition. They don't have any serious exit plan. The head of Exxon said last year, we'll never invest in renewables because they can't, quote, afford above average returns for our investors. That was the game. So we're going to have to do it over their increasingly weakened bodies, let's hope.
It's a sort of classic Schumpeterian capitalist technological disruption, isn't it?
Yes.
You are hyper-capitalist now celebrating technological innovation. This is you're sounding a bit eco-modernist, Bill.
In this case, what's interesting about it, I think, is that as with many technological transformations, the incumbents are not well positioned to lead as we go forward. But what's nice about this transition is that the underlying technology is so cheap that it allows for possibly real subversion and transformation of a lot of the power structures in our society. If you start thinking about where inequality on our world began, one of the places where really grotesque inequality has begun was with the rise of John D. Rockefeller and the oil industry. And suddenly we had wealth on a scale we'd never seen before because fossil fuel was concentrated in a few places. And if you could figure out how to control those few places, then you were, by definition, a powerful person, something that continues to this day. Look, on your side of the pond, the biggest oil baron in Europe is Vladimir Putin. And he's using his winnings to, launch land wars in Europe in the 21st century. Over here, our biggest oil and gas barons were the Koch brothers. They controlled more refining and pipeline capacity than anyone else. They used their money to systematically degrade our democracy. Then there's the king of Saudi Arabia. It's awfully nice to imagine a world, Mark, where we power our planet on a resource that's available literally everywhere to everyone. It won't automatically accomplish all the work that we need to do to address inequality and to rise up small d democracy, but it gets us closer than any other step I can think of that we can take right now.
Yeah, and is it difficult as a campaigner to be out there saying yes to something? I know you've helped block the Keystone XL pipeline. You've been to jail for that. It's sort of easier as an activist to say no to something than it is to say yes. Yes, build this stuff. Yes, build it more quickly.
I actually find people are really excited about. Look, we live in a world where everything's going wrong. It's impossible to imagine in my lifetime a bleaker moment than the one we inhabit now, especially in my country. But I find that people respond immensely to the optimism that comes with these possibilities. Yes, you encounter NIMBYs everywhere, but for the most part, people are like, bring it on. This is fantastic. Solar power, it's interesting. When you look at the polling, it's uniquely popular across ideological and partisan lines. I think sometimes for different reasons. Like in this country, there's a lot of conservatives who are very much into the idea that their home is their castle and they're going to defend it with their assault rifle and, but once they put solar panels on the roof, then it really is their castle, they really are independent. And then there's, good liberals like me, like we're going to network the groovy power of the sun to, save us all. That works too. We can cross those kind of divides. So I'm actually as we get ready for Sunday in this country in September, we're working with groups like Conservatives for Clean Energy. This balcony solar stuff that's sweeping Europe for people in their apartments, just hanging a solar panel off the railing and plugging it into the wall and producing some reasonable share of their power. The only place that it's legal in the U.S. now, as of a couple of months ago, is the deeply conservative state of Utah, where a libertarian state senator said, why on earth should this be illegal? Let's get this done. And they passed law to do just that.
Yeah, probably because they're anti-regulation, right? So oddly enough, same in Texas as well, right? That you don't have regulations. They're not going to stop you doing stuff. So you can,
This is one of the things we're pursuing as part of Sunday. It costs about 3 times as much to put solar on your roof in the US as it does in Australia or much of the EU. And the reason is not that the panels are more expensive. The tariffs add a little bit to the cost, but the basic reason is that we have a completely Byzantine and Baroque permitting system here. You need, there's 10,000 different jurisdictions, your city, your town, your county. Each one has a different set of rules. There's lots of regulations. Happily, we have some ways around that. There's a new set of apps that the federal government produced under Biden that are now available to states that allow for essentially instant permitting. California, Maryland, and New Jersey have already mandated them, and we're working hard to make that happen in the other 47 states. So hopefully that'll help. Rooftop solar will never be as big as utility scale solar and wind, but it plays a really important role, especially now that we're figuring out how to network it together. California had a test 2 days ago of this virtual power plant idea. They'd hooked together 100,000 homeowners who had batteries in their basement, and they used those batteries, combined them one evening to see and it produced a huge amount of power. It was all of a sudden, the equivalent of like a nuclear power plant. And as this spreads, we'll get more and more and more of this. If the U.S. vehicle fleet were all EVs, the batteries of those EVs would hold enough power to run the entire country for 2 days. The possibilities here are shifting so fast that we've hardly begun to really figure them out.
Yeah, we've got a 7 kilowatt solar array, actually ground mounted, and I love using it to charge up our EV. So I'm like, the sun comes out, I'm plugging it in. I've got an app to monitor it. It's funny, you get very nerdy about this. Like the sun's gone in, all right, I'll turn the washing off. Even though it's not about the money, I don't care about the money. It's actually just somehow it's so satisfying to actually run your household from the sun.
I've been running. We've had solar panels for a quarter century, back to the time when they were absurdly expensive. But if I wasn't going to do it, who was? It remains just as pleasant all the time, and it allows. It's when you start thinking about that you really begin to understand the dynamic here. So I was writing something the other day, just sort of saying, here are 2 ways to power a vehicle. One is you learn how to somehow drill for oil 2 miles beneath the surface of the ocean, pump it up to a refinery, vast industrial complex that separates this into various products. You figure out how to ship the gasoline to a gas station, store it in a tank until someone pulls in with their car and fills it, at which point an engine with 2,000 or so moving parts goes into action to control the combustion of this flammable liquid, the series of millions of little explosions of, pistons and cylinders to move your car along the road, all the while, 70% of the energy is just wasted as heat. Or you could put a solar panel on your roof, run a extension cord from it to the front of your car, plug it in to an engine which has 20 moving parts and is 3 or 4 times more efficient in terms of its conversion of energy into motion. one of these systems is going to win out over the other one. It just is. And the only question now is, in my mind, is will it happen fast enough to make a serious difference in our climate outlook? That's where I get scared, Mark, because the deterioration of the climate is now happening in real time. I mean, the things that I was warning about in the 1980s, we're now seeing happen and happen faster than we thought. The effects on truly enormous systems, the jet stream, the Gulf Stream, these are truly terrifying. And it's very clear that we have a limited, very limited amount of time to actually deal with it. So that's why I spend my time now, organizing stuff like this, trying to speed up this reaction. 40 years from now, I think we'll run the planet on sun and wind on sheer economics. But if it takes us 40 years to get there, the planet we run on sun and wind will be a broken planet.
So tell us about Sunday. This is later in September on the autumnal equinox. Is that right? What will you be doing? How widespread is this geographically? And so you want people to join in all around the world, or is this just America?
For the moment, we're piloting it in America because America is the place that needs it the most. At this point, I'm afraid, for better or for worse, every day is Sunday in China. That's the last thing they need. But in America, we definitely need it. And so there'll be hundreds of events, pretty much every city and state. Some of them will be angry, people protesting pipelines that we don't need and pointing out that we should be putting up solar panels instead. But a lot of it will be celebratory. Solar-powered concerts, people opening their homes to show their heat pumps to their neighbors, parades of e-bikes and EVs. E-bikes in particular, I think they're the absolute killer technology of this decade. The fact that we've invented a bicycle that doesn't have hills is, truly remarkable thing. And I think in the long run may prove to be more important than EVs. So lots of fun on this day, but all of it designed to drive home the point that I was trying to make before, that this is no longer alternative energy. For Americans, the way I've been saying it is, it's not the Whole Foods of energy anymore, nice but pricey. Now it's the Costco of energy, cheap, available in bulk, on the shelf, ready to go. If we could get that across, that would go a long ways towards changing some of the political dynamic, at least in blue cities and blue states across America, and also in some red ones, as the Utah and Texas examples prove.
Yeah, and it would also be a lot cheaper if we could just get rid of the tariffs and let, Chinese cheap exports of solar. Also EVs. I mean, they're putting up tariffs against BYD and other Chinese car companies because it's going to destroy domestic car companies in countries which are still hooked on the internal combustion engine. So I just say, go for it, really.
Look, I think you could make an argument. Mark, you've been to as many of these COPs and things as I have. I think you could make an argument that maybe we should just for a few years suspend some of the international work and devote the money and attention to globalizing those Chinese solar power factories, churning out as many solar panels as it's possible to produce, and just leaving them on every wharf and railroad siding around the planet for people to come pick up, take away, and put to use. And my guess is that would be the cheapest and most direct way to change the energy profile of the world in short order.
Yeah, I mean, the whole COPS thing is a bit of an industry in and of itself. So if some of that was repurposed to actually putting in solar arrays, I'd also be quite happy.
Yeah.
I mean, do you mind talking a bit about your career? Because you've been in this business a long time. I think people will be really interested in how you've seen the world change and how that's changed how you write and how you campaign and so on. I mean, the book has a lot of, a few wistful mentions of the end of nature, which was this book you wrote. When was it? 1989?
Yes.
Yeah, which was like the world's first climate book. But I'm not sure how you're referring to it really, whether it's kind of like you're feeling like it's not quite a job well done, but you're not completely pessimistic about it either in terms of what you were looking at then.
The sad part is that we had the warning from the world's scientists and we ignored it. The misery that's causing already and will cause billions of people and the rest of life on this planet weighs heavily on me. I mean, I wonder often if I couldn't have figured out other ways to get this message across more successfully. But I also understood, even as I was writing that book, that this was a very hard task. And the reason it was a very hard task was that the thing that was causing our destruction was also the thing that powered our economy. It was completely woven into everything that we did. And so it was going to be very difficult to do anything about it. Now, I've been organizing as a volunteer for decades, and we've had big successes. The fossil fuel divestment campaign is the biggest anti-corporate campaign in history. We've beaten pipelines, things like that. But we understood at some level that all of this was a holding action designed to weaken, to the extent that we could, the fossil fuel industry, to create as much vacuum as we could to be filled eventually by clean energy technology. And what's happened now is that the world has shifted. All the campaigning we did for 3 decades was on a world where fossil fuel was cheap and renewable energy was expensive. So the work was to try and make fossil energy more expensive. You take away its easy access to capital, put a tax on carbon, stop its expansion to the degree that we could. Now we live in a world where fossil energy is relatively expensive and renewable energy is relatively cheap. In fact, really cheap and getting cheaper all the time. So now the goal of activism has to be to figure out how to speed that transition. We've got the economic wind at our back now, but that doesn't get us going as fast as we need to, especially since in a world where money translates into political power, the capital flow of the fossil fuel industry is enough to buy them time. Time is the thing we can't let them have. So that's why it remains a fight for organizers and activists, as well as engineers and economists.
I've noticed as we pass 1.5, in real time, the conversation has moved interestingly towards things like geoengineering, solar radiation management, it makes sense in a kind of logical way that we could change the temperature of the planet very directly using aerosols in the stratosphere. But there are some pretty big risks that come alongside that of termination shock, or consequences of precipitation and so on. And plus, there's so many conspiracy theories out there about actually like 20% of Americans already believe the US government's modifying the climate with chemicals in the atmosphere, believe it or not. So imagine if they actually were modifying the climate with chemicals in the atmosphere. But give me your take on that, because I'd be really interested to hear it.
I mean, I think that it's the dumbest possible solution, and that if we don't take the opportunities afforded by the much wiser solutions, then we may reach a point in the not very distant future where we end up just breaking the glass and pulling that handle. But I think if we do, it'll come with immense drawbacks. And I think it's a disgusting commentary on our human institutions if we end up doing that. I used to run a homeless shelter in the basement of my church, so I knew a lot of junkies. And this is a kind of junkie's solution to a problem, It's a way to keep on doing the dumb things that I'm doing now and not changing, and yet not having it kill me. It's the, I don't know what it is, the equivalent of Narcan or something for the climate. And if we have to do it, then I guess someday we'll have to do it. But for the moment, the thing we should be doing is putting up solar panels and wind turbines and plugging them into batteries. That's, for me, works on every level. And it's clearly the overriding human task of our time on Earth.
Wow. You mentioned your church. I mean, is your faith important to you in terms of the belief in a better future, or the belief in the goodness of our fellow human beings? I mean, how does that kind of sustain your activism work?
Well, it's the world I grew up in, and I've never risen very high in the ecclesial hierarchy. I'm a Methodist Sunday school teacher in our little rural church. That's about as far as I've ever gotten. But look, the basic message of The Old Testament is, the first commandment of the Old Testament is take care of the earth. And the overriding commandment of the New Testament is love your neighbor. At the moment, we're not taking care of the earth, and we're drowning our neighbors and making it too hot for them to grow food, and on and on and on. So you don't have to be I'm not a sophisticated theologian, and you needn't be one to see that we're called to try and help. And I've been I must say, very pleased to watch religious communities take this on, most notably, of course, Pope Francis, who, alongside Greta Thunberg, I think had a reasonable claim on being the most effective environmentalist of his time. And it looks like his successor is going to continue in the same way. They announced last week that Vatican City will officially become the first fully solar state, nation state, next year. They're building the big solar farm on the outskirts of Rome right now. That's a beautiful moment.
So I would recommend everyone to buy and read your book, Here Comes the Sun. Anything else that you want to tell people? What's your recommendation that people should do, and people who are listening to this and want to be involved?
Well, if you're in the States, join us for this Sunday thing. You go to sunday.earth. It's really around the world. Go check it out because it's very beautiful. The website's very beautiful, and the set of activities that people are planning are very beautiful. And I think that's something that everybody should just take a moment to think about, that the technology that we're talking about here is deeply beautiful. We're talking about energy from heaven, not from hell. We're talking about the most charismatic object in our universe, our local star, that already provides us with warmth and with light and with photosynthesis. And now it's willing to provide us with all the power we could ever use, which is a beautiful, beautiful gift. So, if you don't do anything else today, go stream Here Comes the Sun on your Spotify or whatever, and just think for a minute about the possibility that we really could live in a different world than the one we inhabit now.
Well, I'm really enjoying this sort of inspiring, upbeat Bill McKibben. I also enjoyed the dour, gloomy one, always warning about terrible things to come. But how's it feel to have a smile on your face?
I just work in reality, Mark. That's, I follow it where it leads me. And right now we've got some decent reality to work with. So let's do it.
And maybe leave us with a sort of inspiring summary of how the world looks after the transformation, like when we've done all these things that you're asking for.
I hope that the world looks like a slightly more democratic place with more local power and local economy, more people able to play a real role, somewhat less grotesquely unequal, and somewhat more connected to the natural world. I think it's a beautiful notion that we can look up and see the source of the power that we use. I think it's a lot less abstracted than burning coal in some distant power station someplace and running it down a line. And so I hope that over time, it changes not just the way the planet physically operates, but the way that we operate in it, at least a little bit.
Well, Bill McKibben, thanks so much for joining us, and I wish you all the best with the book and also with Sunday. And I'll be joining you, and I hope millions more will come and help do what they can to usher along this clean energy transformation, which is already underway.
Thank you, brother, and thank you for all the good work you've done over the years and all the good books, and now this good project. So many, many thanks to you and your team.
Thanks so much, Bill. Take care now. Thanks so much for listening to Saving the World from Bad Ideas, a We Planet podcast. We Planet's a movement of citizens and scientists dedicated to defending the science and solutions we need to save the world. Please do subscribe and share a nice review. It helps us spread the message. We'd also love to hear your feedback and suggestions at our email, podcast@weplanet.org. Please also join our podcast mailing list and we'll let you know when a new episode drops. Just go to savingtheworldfrombadideas.org or weplanet.org/podcast right now. See you next time.